You're listening to the Cinemental Podcast.
Shall we begin?
Welcome back to the Cinemental Podcast, where we discuss mental health themes from cinema, television, and popular culture. I'm Jeffrey Jones, and I'm a filmmaker and professor, and I'm joined, as always, by my brother, Dr. Joshua Jones, who, along with being his own personal euphoria, is a general and forensic psychiatrist.
Jeff, I am so excited to get into this episode today. This is one of my favorite shows of all time. No, it really is. I think it is so great that we get to go back and revisit some of the stresses of high school with our good friends Zach and Slater and Kelly Kapowski. And
not that show, Josh. Not that. We could do Saved by the Bell at some point. But
I was actually imagining this morning Saved by the Bell, but with Euphoria themes, where like Zach and Slater are debating whether to do big snifters of coke off each other's erect penises and things like that. So,
well, and what's funny is Riverdale was essentially that for the Archie comics.
Oh, sure.
And so Euphoria is the Riverdale treatment for Saved by the Bell and all the other shows.
I am embarrassed to admit that I have seen every single episode of Riverdale because my daughter loved it so much that we watched it. And of course, by the third, fourth, fifth seasons, we just made fun of it every episode because it was so ludicrous. But
season one was legit. Season one was a good season.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it went off the rails, but that's not what we're here to talk about today, Jeff.
Yeah, because all shows do. And in fact, we're going to talk about what happens in season 2, 3, 4 when we talk about The Pit in a couple of weeks. So I'm excited to talk about that because that is a screenwriting phenomenon known as second season fatigue. But yeah, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Euphoria. But before we do that, we want you to start your week off right with our podcast. So we drop a new episode every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, or you can watch our hottest, spiciest clips and full episodes on YouTube. Because I know there's nothing more that people want to do than just watch our mugs for an hour.
Well, yeah, they should. Jeff, Now, did we hit a milestone this week?
Did we hit a milestone?
For the podcast?
Maybe. Oh, yeah, we did. So not for the podcast, but for where we put our clips, we reached 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is very exciting. And that was mostly driven by the clips from the podcast. We hit that first big milestone that every YouTuber will tell you. The first 1,000 subscribers is by far the hardest. So yeah, we hit that milestone this week. I thought you were talking about this being our 100th episode, and we're a little shy. We're a little shy of that.
We're getting there. But look, those 1,000 subscribers is really, really tough to get to, and I'm really glad we have. I mean, mostly it's tough for me to create 1,000 individual usernames.
Gmail accounts. That's fantastic. Josh, I'm sure it's just the angle of your camera, but that painting behind you looks so askew. Is it actually askew?
Jeff, it's a new look I'm going for. But no, I'm tilted a little bit. So I'm not at all sorry because I think it makes me look mysterious.
There you go. All right. Okay, so today we're talking about Euphoria. Euphoria follows a group of high school students navigating addiction, identity, trauma, and relationships in an intense, hyper-stylized world. At its center is Rue, a recovering addict whose perspective pulls us through the chaos of adolescence, where every emotion feels like life or death. Wow, there is so much mental health to talk about with Euphoria. Tell us some of the things we're going to talk about today, Josh.
Jeff, this is going to be a wide-ranging podcast. I mean, there's actually too many mental health themes in the 2 seasons of Euphoria to cover in this podcast. Sure. The primary one that we are going to talk about after we go through some, brief analyses of some of the characters, but the primary one we're going to talk about is substance use and addiction. Sure. It is the narrative that runs through Rue's character arc throughout both seasons, and I'm sure into season 3 as well. And of course, the portrayal by Zendaya of this incredibly flawed, damaged, yet heroic young woman as she tries to navigate high school relationships and crippling substance abuse is astonishing.
She is beyond incredible as an actress. I watched a few episodes of her Disney show, and she was good. she was definitely like a Disney star, and it was really fun. But then when I started watching Euphoria, oh my goodness, she is so beyond incredible as an actress. Her portrayal of someone dealing with substance abuse, the nuance of her portrayal is so incredible. To the point where it's like you kind of imagine that she must have gone through it to know as much as she does about the nuance of it. And I don't think she did. I think she's just that good of an actress.
I think you're probably right. We'll talk a lot about some of the very specific physical symptoms that she acts to near perfection during the episode that we're really going to focus on, season 2, episode 5, later in the podcast. But you're right. This young woman is a force. I actually also saw her in some of her Disney shows. My daughter loved them and loved her.
Yeah, and that was the right age too. She was like she grew up kind of with Zendaya.
She grew up with Zendaya. But where Zendaya, I'm not kidding on this. Where Zendaya really made her mark for me were the few episodes that I watched where she was on Dancing with the Stars. And
I forgot
she was so professional, so focused, so dialed in. I looked at her and said, she's a killer. And not in a bad way. Just like, I'm going to do everything to the best of my ability.
Yeah, she reminds me of Michael B. Jordan, who's just apparently one of the hardest working guys in show business and very like just kind of sucks up all the information available, from whoever will kind of guide him. But he works incredibly hard at his craft, and the proof is in the pudding. I mean, I think Michael B. Jordan and they are stars for a long time.
She kind of reminds me of Michael V. Jordan.
Sure.
in her approach and just that killer instinct to be the best at her craft. So
I wouldn't be shocked if we talk about Zendaya one day as one of the best actresses of all time. I would not be shocked about that at all. Josh,
neither would your coffee mug as you talked to it during that bit.
Okay. I had a sponsor this week, Josh, but it's dumb. It was Tox City. It was a dating app where it pairs you with terrible people. It was Euphoria adjacent, but I'm like, let's just dive in, man.
What Tox City, that it pairs you with terrible people?
Yeah, it was a dating app. It was going to be a dating app called
I was going to say,
City.
isn't that just called Tinder?
Yeah, there you go. And I want to do a little preface, Josh, because... So K-pop, our episode on K-pop, didn't do all that well. And that's okay, because the audience that watched K-pop, there's not a lot of crossover between the K-pop audience and the Cinemental audience. But I want to say that like this is an episode, I think, that all parents should probably listen to. Because we're going to talk a lot about the mental health of teenagers. And while Euphoria is a grand, ridiculous, over-the-top portrayal, all of the themes that they're dealing with are the themes that kids go through. And they can feel as big as Euphoria makes them to the individuals, to the kids. And so I think that this episode can give parents a pretty good idea of what their kids might be going through and how intense it can feel. So I just want to throw that out in advance of this is for everyone, but I think that parents might want to tune into this one.
Well, Jeff, let's talk about the big feelings about being a teenager.
Sure.
Because I think you're right. We're going to focus a lot on the substance abuse here, but you're right. What all these kids feel are huge emotions.
Right.
Every one of them. Rue, Jules, Nate, Cassie, Maddie, Kat, they all are larger than life emoters. And each of them has kind of their own, flavor of what they're dealing with. But the intensity to which teenagers feel emotions is a little lost on adults. We went through this too. And if you're listening to the podcast, you survived it. And most people end up figuring out how to deal with their big emotions in probably not super healthy ways. I think it's a fairly unique individual. Hopefully it's becoming a little bit less inaccessible to be able to, maturely deal with your big feelings as we go on. But as kind of some of the societal stigma of, being a man and not feeling big emotions kind of goes away. It's replaced by other stresses such as social media, easy access to drugs, etc., that cloud the picture. So the big feelings, I agree with you. And Jeff, I mean, you and I are both big feelers. How did this hit you watching this and then seeing your own, seeing how you have 2 young kids, seeing that you have 2 adult nieces and nephews now? How'd this hit you?
Yeah, I mean, I love this show. And mainly I love the show because it's so cinematically beautiful. So it just connected with me on that level. And it's, something interesting that you said, Josh, was parents kind of forget what it's like to be a kid. And it's one of those things where I remember even as a kid, I was like, I'm going to remember how I felt right now. I remember saying this to myself as a 7-year-old. I'm going to remember how I feel right now, and I'm not going to make the same mistakes that my parents did. And a lot of it had to do with fairness and attention, where I was sort of being dismissed because I was a kid with these big emotions. And it's like, sure, but these emotions are real to me. And why can't we address those emotions because they're real in a much more healthy and less dismissive way? And then also, like, fairness matters, and it should matter to kids. And when you give a kid a promise, you need to follow through with that. And it can't be like, well, we just don't have time for that now. No, your word needs to be your bond with your kid, because that's one of the few things that they can count on. They don't have a lot of control. And so when you give your word to a kid, that's something that they can hold on to. And so you have to keep your word. And I think about that a lot, especially with Windsor now that she's, 4.5, where it's like she has some really big feelings. And I'm like, God, I don't have time. You know what? I absolutely have time for this. There's nothing more important to spend my time on than this. And when kids get into high school, we kind of think they're adults. And they're really, really not. And we want to treat them with adults, and it's that fine line of giving them responsibility, but also knowing that they're going to make some pretty terrible choices. And that they're probably going to do a lot of lying to you and trying to manage all of that. And so, like, I love the show. It scares the heck out of me for when I have kids that are in high school. I live in LA where identity and some pretty superficial stuff kind of rule the day. I'm going to have to deal with a lot of that. I know it's a crazy show, but I do think that kids go through a lot of the stuff that the kids went through in Euphoria. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's not an unrealistic show. That's one of the things I think is really important. And for a little developmental context here, all these kids, these teenagers, their prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain through which a lot of decision-making, executive functioning, reasoning, and judgment flows through, that's not developed yet. We know this from decades of scientific studies and observations that the executive functioning and reasoning functions of the brain really don't develop until your mid-20s.
Right.
But
Taylor, go ahead.
As you pointed out, we think of teenagers as adults. Right. I will say that this show is a little bit of the problem with that. And Hollywood is a little bit of the problem with that, is that they glamorize, and look, Euphoria has a lot of bad consequences, but it is also glamorizing a lot of these behaviors, as has shows like Riverdale and 90210 and Glamour or Gossip Girl, and every one of those glamorizes teens acting as adults.
What are the tough parts about that, Josh? Because I disagree with you in this regard. Yes, it's glamorized, but for kids, it's weirdly glamorous. And this kind of leads into something that you and I talked about, where, like, kids want to be miserably sexy. And a lot of that is handed to kids through media, through billboards. You don't see a lot of billboards for Dior and all these, like, really luxurious brands where there are happy models. They're usually incredibly miserable and wafy and overly skinny, and they just look miserable, but they look miserably sexy. And I think that a lot of kids, that's their goal, is to be miserably sexy. And I want to ask you a question about this, Josh, because I'm curious if this is a mental health thing. I have found when I was a kid, and I remember this, and I still see it with kids nowadays, kids are really attracted to highly emotional and highly stressful things. Like if their friends are going through something bad, they glom onto it. They really want to be a part of it. Is it developmentally appropriate for kids to kind of chase this miserableness?
Yes, it is. It is. It's developmentally appropriate for kids to chase really intense emotions. They're going through them.
That's what I meant. Instead of miserable, it's really intense.
Yeah, they're trying to identify with their peers. I mean, the whole development in the teenage years is so complex.
Yeah.
Kids are trying to figure out who they are, and they may be trying to figure out who they are as a gender, who they are sexually, but they're also just trying to figure out who they are in terms of interacting with this often cold, unforgiving world that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
At the same time, trying to manage friendships, trying to manage relationships with parents, trying to manage stresses. I mean, it's a crazy amount of brain development that is going on.
Yeah.
And kids are setting down patterns that will last with them for the rest of their lives in some cases. They're trying on a lot of different patterns. And so this is one of those things, and this is not meant to be dismissive in any way. Teens go through a ton of phases, trying things on to see if it fits with their own internal world, if it helps alleviate some of their anxiety, if it helps provide them with the excitement that makes them want to go forward. I mean, I see this with my own kids and with my son, who is an incredibly active, incredibly intelligent young man. He went through BMX to mountain biking to snowboarding, now to drift car racing, and just trying these things.
So badass. Good for him. Drift car racing, that's so badass.
Well, we actually have founded PMC Motorsports as an arm of our little corporation.
Good for him, man.
Try to make a go.
Can I make a point real quick, Josh? Because there's something you said that was very interesting there. It's the trying stuff on, and this is the part where, again, I hope that like parents are paying attention. It is the time when we're trying stuff on, when people are trying to figure out who they are, and it's really hard to fail at that. And so when kids are trying stuff on and then that doesn't work and they're back to square one of sort of figuring out who they are, that reversion or that reversal, that step back can be really hard. And be like, God, that's not who I am. Then who am I? You know, I remember mom pressuring me into lying about what my major was going to be because I was winning some award and I was undecided. And she was like, just say computer science. And I was like, I don't want to say computer science. That's not my major. I haven't decided on that. She's like, just say it. Because it was embarrassing to her that I hadn't figured out my life yet. And I was so mad at her for that because I'm like, I just want to be who I am. I want to be true to myself. And so I said, undecided where I'm going to college, undecided major. And everybody else had a plan and they were playing the role of like, this is who I am. I'm a good student. And I was so annoyed that I was pressured into pretending to be somebody that I wasn't. And it would have been a lot better for our relationship if my mom had been like, you know what? It's okay you don't know yet. Let's figure it out together. How can I help you figure it out? It would have been a lot better for me. Yeah.
Well, Jeff, you've always been a person who's been a little bit more comfortable with ambiguity than necessarily your same age-matched peers.
True.
And that is actually a piece of resilience. For a lot of folks. So, and we see that with a lot of the characters in Euphoria. A lot of the characters are incredibly resilient. And those that are incredibly resilient are, interestingly enough, a little bit more okay with ambiguity. Which is a fascinating parallel.
Who's your favorite character in this, Josh?
Jeff, first of all, let me get off my chest. I can't stand this show. Cannot stand it. But there's a lot of caveats to that. You're right. This is a beautiful show.
Yeah.
It is incredibly well acted. It is incredibly well written. There's nothing about the show that doesn't make it a masterpiece. I hate it. It's not for me.
I do think that's one of those. Go ahead.
Partly or maybe mostly because this is what I deal with every day in my job.
Sure.
I don't want to come home and be like, oh, let me relax with, or let me get, excited by Euphoria. It's the same problem I had with Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad was a beautiful, wonderful show. I get it, blah, blah, blah. You all can tell me about it in the comments.
Yeah.
But I just wasn't for me.
You know what's funny, Josh, is when I was an agent, I loved Entourage. Man, I thought that was a great show. Even though I was living that life, I loved it. One of the effects I think I've had on you, Josh, which I pat myself on the back for, is your ability to be like, I hate this show, but it's a good show. It's really well. There's a lot to like about it. It's just not for me. And I think that's because I just think that art it's so easy to dismiss art and forget that behind it, there's a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of care that goes into it. And so to just say like, oh, I hate that is like, can we just acknowledge the art a little bit?
But you asked me who my favorite character was. Yeah. And my favorite character is actually Fezco.
Yeah.
I really, really liked him.
Fezco's great.
He was he was a morally ambiguous drug dealer who corrupted his young adopted brother, into the drug trade. But, it's like the drug dealer with a heart of gold. And I just really found his character complex. I found his character compelling. I found him to have a morality, a moral code that was really strong, even if it didn't comport with society's moral code.
Yeah, and this is the thing where, like, society's moral code, I don't know how to say this where I'm not going to get canceled, but, like, society's moral code can go fuck itself. We don't look... You, Josh, are essentially a drug dealer that you have to impress. People come to you and want drugs, and they have to tell you one awesome story about their mental health before you give them drugs. I don't have any problem with drug dealers if you go about it the right way. And he's just selling a product. He's selling a product that people want. And, when it comes to people like Rue, he's like, I don't want to sell you drugs. You abuse it. I don't want to be a part of that. He, doesn't want to sell fentanyl because he's like, that's killing people. I don't want to be a part of that. And I actually think that there are good, honest, moral drug dealers. I think that there is a line that a lot of drug dealers will not cross. I don't think that that's any worse than the executives who are making McDonald's, who are pushing all the foods that are making us obese. I think it's so easy to throw this is an evil person tag onto a drug dealer. But I think Fezco is probably a more accurate portrayal of drug dealers than a lot of shows.
Well, that was Fez's grandmother's point in season 2, episode 1, that nobody's upset at McDonald's because somebody ate themselves to death. I don't think that it is an apt parallel for a lot of reasons, primarily because of all the, laws and that you have to break. There's a lot of killing. There's a lot. Okay,
let me ask you this, Josh. Let me ask you this: were the people who were selling marijuana, were they immoral before it was legal and moral after it was legal?
No.
That's what I'm saying.
I think they're immoral.
You think they're immoral across the board?
I don't know. I think that was a provocative statement. Marijuana is not a safe drug. I'm going to come out and say it. That's probably going to get me canceled. Probably going to give us a lot of hate comments. It is not a safe drug.
Okay, well then what about alcohol? Because alcohol is legal, and alcohol is incredibly unsafe.
Also not a safe drug.
So do you think bartenders are immoral?
Jeff, I think everyone's immoral.
All right, let's move on to Euphoria. Josh, I actually want to do the screenwriting topic of the day first today.
Yeah.
Because Euphoria is one of those very rare shows that is both high concept and character driven and has a fantastic, constantly running theme. Cheers is another good example of this. So Cheers, We all know what cheers means. We sort of get the idea that this is going to be in a bar. And every character is always dealing with the same thematic issue. That's true in Euphoria. And we see the characters make the same mistake over and over. And bonus points for a show if you have different characters, but they're making the same types of mistakes.
Okay.
So the theme of Euphoria, and it's right there in the title, Euphoria is about the consequences of trying to shortcut happiness, shortcut peace, to shortcut joy. It's we watch them pay the price of momentary euphoria.
Okay.
And you think like Euphoria, oh, it's this thing we want to reach. They want to reach peace. They want to reach joy, but they're so behind the eight ball in their ability to get there, and they try and make all these shortcuts. And every single one makes the same shortcut every episode over and over again. And that's what makes a great show. Go ahead.
So character meets theme meets high concept equals great show.
Equals just great show.
Remind us what high concept is again.
So high concept is something that is incredibly easy to pitch. We sort of understand it from either the title of the show or the movie poster. Jurassic Park being the classic example. It's a dinosaur park. We get it. Euphoria, it's one word, and it tells you, as soon as you start watching the show, you're like, I get it. All of these kids are chasing euphoria and failing and not understanding that euphoria is the enemy of happiness. But they're chasing it anyway. And so we're constantly seeing them chase it. And so in one word, they tell you exactly what the show is about. But it's that chasing euphoria, Josh, that I think that is the driving force of the conversation. And I'm going to do a little bonus screenwriting thing for you, Josh. Season 3 of this show will not be well received.
Tell me more.
Because they're out of high school. Because they're grown. And I don't think we're going to have as much empathy for the adults as we did for the kids. And because it's now out of high school, I don't think the show is going to be well received.
Yeah, because they're out of high school. I mean, we've seen that with a lot of classic shows, like, for instance, Saved by the Bell, the college years. Not well received.
If you want to do Saved by the Bell, Josh, we'll just do Saved by the Bell.
Whenever anybody
I think our actual age audience would like to see Saved by the Bell.
Whenever anybody talks about one of these, like, teen shows where they're acting above theirs, I just always go back to Saved by the Bell, man.
Okay, Josh, we're going to talk extensively about Rue, but let's just kind of rifle through some of the other characters and talk about, whether you think that they have a diagnosis and, if we can connect them to that feeling of euphoria, how does it connect? My personal favorite character in this was Jules. I think that Jules is by far the most interesting. She's the most dynamic. She's the most, in my opinion, resilient. Tell me some stuff I don't know about Jules.
Jules, expertly played by the actress Hunter Schafer, struggles with, doesn't struggle with her gender identity, not in the show. They show some flashbacks where she struggled with her gender identity and made the decision. Although she did at one point consider going off the hormones and reverting back. But yeah, she has identity struggles and attachment issues, wanting external validation to her internal feelings all the time. She seeks that out in Rue, a very imperfect and ambiguously unstable person to get that from.
She seeks it through the daddy dom people that she's meeting.
And that as well, which is two sides of the same coin. And really, the core idea for somebody like Jules is, if somebody loves me, then I exist. Yeah,
one of the things that breaks my heart about that Jules character is that she has such a great relationship with her dad, and her dad just doesn't know. And it's like, she looks healthy to the dad, and so how do you step in when you don't know that there's a problem? And like, I just think about that of like, God, I hope I know what's going on with my kids when they grow up. God, I hope I know what's going on. I hope they trust me enough to tell me, and I know that like I can earn that trust, but also it is a natural part of growth to start withholding things from the adults and to have that separation from adults. Man, that one's tough for me. That one's really tough.
Yeah, but you're right, Jeff. That is part of the natural separation and the search for identity and the finding identity that kids and teenagers and young adults do. And it's very natural, and you shouldn't try to subvert it because that creates an unhealthy attachment or rejection of that attachment for the adult parenting relationship that is actually very important and very healthy. Now, you hope that your kids aren't going out like Jules and finding these sub-dom relationships with adults that are exploiting them. But having secrets from your parents is natural.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question, Josh, because this is something that we didn't have to deal with our generation, but is a real thing now. How do you feel about the tracking apps for tracking your children and whether or not that's healthy, especially in the teen years?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think that it is probably both good and bad. And I know you hate it when I give you an equivocal answer like that, but let me explain why.
Sure.
I think it is probably bad because it creates an increased amount of anxiety for the parents to try to figure out where their kids are, and then probably more conflict with, I saw that you were supposed to go to the McDonald's, but you ended up going over to Janie's house, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And that kind of, little subterfuge is pretty healthy as a child individuates, etc. So it probably is bad from that regard. On the other hand, as we've talked about, the other thing that we don't have, or that you and I didn't have, was that there's twice as many people on this planet as there were when we were growing up.
Right.
There's more opportunities for just the sheer numbers of people who are trying to exploit your kids. There are more opportunities for them to have access to them through apps and things like that. I mean, it has always been extremely rare for just the random person to come up on the street and grab your kid. That's always been extremely rare. But it is no longer rare for people to try to exploit children through the internet, through social media, through messaging apps, and things like that. Yeah. So, on the other hand, it probably is a good idea to be able to know where your kid is more nowadays. I mean, we were free-range children, and I would never want to go back and give that up. That was amazing.
We were also free-range children in the woods, not in a big city.
Exactly. So
we lived way in the woods. There was no place for us to go. Yeah. Except for up a tree, which God bless our mom having to deal with the call that I fell out of a 30-foot tree the day she dropped Dad off to her first cancer appointment.
Yeah, that was a big day. Yeah, that was a big day, and we had no cell phones. Yeah. I was actually home. I actually got home.
Imagine if that tree had been a half mile into the woods.
Sure, but I mean, but listen to this. So I got home that day. I knew it was Dad's first cancer appointment. I got home by myself. Nobody was there. I had no idea that you'd fallen, scraped your face off a tree, and Mom had taken you to the emergency room. I was there doing my thing after school. Then it started to get dark. Nobody was there for dinner, and I was like, "What's going on?
What the hell's?" And you had no one to call.
No one to call. I just sat there in the anxiety.
Although, and I'm just going to do a very quick shout out here, Josh, you did have somewhere to go because our neighbor, Brad Larson, was one of the greatest men that I have ever known, and he was basically a second dad to us. And if I had been in that situation, and I guarantee you probably would have as well, you would have just gone down to the Larsons and known that you were safe. And known
Jeff, that was the thing, though. That was the thing in our neighborhood. We had the Larsons right next door. We had the Lloyds right next to them. I could have gone to either of those places if I really felt like, hey, this is a problem. I could have gone to those places. Not called, just gone there, knocked on the door and said, I don't know where my parents are. Can I hang out? Yeah.
You don't know it as a kid because everything is normal to you. But like the older I get, the more I realize that like Brad Larson is just one of the greatest men that I think I ever knew. And he's savage on Facebook right now, just ripping apart MAGA. Like he is savage, and he has a lot of friends who disagree with him. But man, I'm always like coming to his defense because I'm like, you don't know. Brad Larson is 10 times a better man than you are. Anyway, let's move on from Jules and apparently Brad Larson. Talk to me about Nate Jacobs.
Yeah, Nate Jacobs, again, amazingly portrayed by Jacob Elordi, who is one of my favorite actors nowadays. And he does a magnificent
Watch
job in
Frankenstein, everybody. He's incredible.
Yeah, he's an Academy Award nominated actor.
And deserved it.
And deservedly so. So Nate Jacobs, he has antisocial personality disorder. He is a sociopath, if not fully formed, because personality doesn't really fully form until around age 25. Then he's showing a ton of antisocial personality traits. He lacks control of his anger. He is aggressive. He's manipulative. He definitely lacks empathy towards really anyone around him, with the exception of his mom a little bit. Which is not unusual, actually, for somebody who is a sociopath. Remember, even though antisocial personality disorder or sociopathy is characterized by a lack of empathy, for most people, it's not a complete and total lack of empathy. Everything is on a scale, and so he is, he's a sociopath. He's also a traumatized kid.
That's the thing. Is like obviously you're right. But I'm also like, the entire time you're talking that, I'm like, he's so traumatized. Can we really say he's a sociopath? Because he's so traumatized.
Yes, we can say he's a sociopath, even though he's traumatized. A lot of sociopaths are traumatized, but a lot of people who get traumatized don't become sociopaths.
So you think if he dealt with his trauma, he'd still be a sociopath?
I do.
Okay,
I do.
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, let me backtrack that, because again, I'm conflating the fact that these are adult actors with the fact that they're portraying children. I mean, he's a child.
Right.
He's 17, when we pick up the story there. So he's got time to grow out of it. But yeah, I do think that he's going to be a sociopath. The behaviors are strong enough with him that's what he's going to be.
Yeah, and also the trauma is so strong that it's like, even if you believe that you could get over it with reduction in your trauma or dealing with your trauma, that trauma's never going to go away. I don't see him sitting down to some CBT anytime soon. Yeah, Jacob was 21. He was 21 when he played that character, which is actually fairly young for teenage shows.
Teenage actors, sure.
For teenage actors,
yeah.
Yeah, I said this in the Frankenstein episode, but I just say it again, Josh. Imagine being the casting director when Jacob Elordi walks in for the first time and you've never seen him before, and it's like, everybody else could just go home. Like, as soon as he walks in, it's game over. Why would you need to see anybody else? Like, this is the first thing I had seen him in, and as soon as I saw him, I was like, oh, that guy's going to be a superstar. There's no doubt about that. Oh, yeah, here's the next. I'm going to be staring at that guy the next 30 years of my life. Yeah, what an absolute star maker this show was. Okay, let's talk about Cassie, Maddie. Kind of rifle through them because I really want to get to Rue.
Yeah. I mean, look, Cassie, Maddie, Kat, they've all got their own flavors of what teenagers are going through. I mean, Cassie's very dependent. She's going to become whoever you need her to be so that you don't leave. Maddie's got, trauma and emotional regulation issues. She views power as protection. And then Kat's got some body image and validation issues. She's addicted to it, in fact. And her core idea of her character is confidence versus performance. I think the other one to talk about is Cal Jacobs, played by the late Eric Dane at Danes at this point, and he's got a deeply repressed sexuality and is a victimizer of people, and his core idea is the damage of a life lived unhonestly, and it's a sad one. Before we get to Rue, I just want to say about Eric Danes, I thought he was a great actor. He's gone way before his time.
Did you see The Last Ship, Josh?
I watched every episode of The Last Ship. I loved The Last Ship.
He was great, I believed him as that sort of master, sort of commander type of role. He 100% was the, kind of the loving alpha in that show. He was fantastic. He was so good.
he and Adam Baldwin, who played a second in command, had a really good captain number one relationship.
Talk about somebody underrated. Adam Baldwin is so
Oh
underrated.
my God, so underrated.
He can do it all. He's a really good actor.
Yeah, he's yes.
Let's go back real quick though, Josh, to Kat and Maddie and Cassie, because they do kind of have the same issue, as does Jules, and this might be sort of a statement about teenage girls that the filmmaker is trying to make. But it's a lot of this idea of like validation gives me self-worth.
Yes, absolutely.
And again, it's that chasing of like, I'm going to feel really good if somebody tells me I'm good. And so they're chasing that euphoria, they're chasing that feeling of ecstasy rather than that feeling of joy, which comes from, hey, let me do some internal work, et cetera, et cetera. Should kids go to therapy to deal with these things, or are they just kind of like sort of awash in a dangerous sea as they're going through high school?
Well, they were awash in a dangerous sea going through high school and always have been. I think what the filmmakers
I'm saying general kids, like, because I do think that that's a universal. It's a little bit of a universal experience, not just for girls, by the way. For boys as well, where I definitely like needed validation from my coaches, not so much from my peers, but like, being an athlete, I wanted validation from my coaches, to the point where, one of my coaches took advantage of that. But that need for validation is incredibly powerful. Should kids be going? How do kids deal with that, Josh? How do kids get through that stormy sea?
Well, they used to get through that stormy sea by having that kind of extinguish as you got out of high school and you got into a world where the validation wasn't so poignant, wasn't so salient to your existence, and it could kind of extinguish.
So writing it out.
The problem now is that we live in an attention economy.
Oh, absolutely.
And you and I
are part of it.
This. We're doing it right now. But the attention and that validation is now being extended as part of folks' identity deep into adulthood.
Right.
And I don't quite know how we're going to reconcile that going forward with mental health.
No, I don't either. And you see it all the time where like these even aged influencers do well, and then the inevitable happens where there's a fall or they say something wrong, and all of a sudden they start to lose that audience, and they don't handle it well at all. They start to lose that validation. And these are grown-ass men and women. And then we're behind that wall of you can say things and there isn't like a direct negative response. It's crushing to watch. And we absolutely have taken that attention economy from high school and moved it into the rest of our lives. Yeah.
We're starting to see some backlash on this. There are certainly some governments, Australia's one, that have limited or completely banned social media for teens, which I think is a good idea. And then we're also just seeing some generational choices amongst Gen Z to, give up smartphones or to limit your time. Now, some of this, unfortunately, ends up being classist because you can choose to give up a smartphone nowadays if you have other ways to, and can pay to get it. It's so bizarre how quickly this morphs in our society. But I mean, we're gonna have to reconcile the damage that we have done and are doing with social media and the attention economy with smartphones ever present. We're gonna have to reconcile that.
Yeah,
and I don't know how that's gonna happen.
I say all the time that I would like to go back to just a flip phone, but it's not true. I like having a navigation device on my phone. There's a lot of apps that I just use on a daily basis now. I couldn't go back, but it sucks. I wish we could. Okay, Josh, let's talk about Rue. And this is where we're going to get into substance abuse, which I think Rue is the only one who really suffers from substance abuse. There's a lot of people who use, maybe some people who are addicted, but Rue really suffers. And when we start the show, it's post her going to rehab. But in rewatching the pilot, I was really fascinated by the storyline and her backstory of having so many mental health issues as a kid and being so over-medicated. And she has a line where she's like, I'm just exhausted. I'm just so tired of this. And then she gets that hit of drugs. And for a minute, she can feel okay. I thought that was fascinating. Is that sort of experience true of people who are addicted to drugs or who have an addictive personality? Or was that sort of special to this show? And if it is special to the show, man, they did a great job of just making her substance abuse disorder heartbreaking.
The story that Rue comes with to her addiction is not unfamiliar. It would not be unusual. Right. Have I seen a patient just like that? I haven't, but it is a very familiar flavor of story with a million different variations based on the individual person. Right. What really struck me with that backstory that you talked about was how the first symptoms that really came to the attention of her parents were obsessive compulsive disorder symptoms, where she could not stop counting and checking, and when it got interrupted, she melted down. That actually makes a lot of sense to me. Okay. What they then showed was that she got a plethora of diagnoses as the
bipolar, ADHD,
and psychologists tried to figure out what was going on with her. That also, unfortunately, is somewhat usual for a kid who ends up with, psychiatric hospitalizations and trips to rehab, that there is a very significant level of distress, but nobody really knows what to call it, which is a little bit of a danger of our diagnostic system that we have right now. And I've mentioned before, I'll mention many times, diagnoses are just shorthand ways for medical professionals to communicate with each other about what might be going on with a person, and they should not define you in any way, shape, or form. Right. Just like the plethora of diagnoses that Rue had shouldn't define her. She was very distressed. She needed a lot of help. And her parents and her clinicians tried their best to help her with our very rudimentary science that we have now.
Yeah. There are times where this is what I hear, but I'll hear a doctor be like, yeah, you have general feeling shitty disorder. And I'm like, well, okay, so you're just telling me that, like, I feel shitty. That's all you're telling me. That doesn't help me at all. But, exactly what you're saying makes sense, is that sometimes it is just we need to call it something. We need to be able to call it something. And so this is what we're going to call it. We need to learn more about it before we can really tell you what's going on. But for now, we're going to refer to it with these words. And I think in general, having words for things helps people out. And I think that's true in many aspects, not just mental health, but like when you can name it, you can tame it. It's something that a lot of psychologists tend to say.
Yeah, for sure. And for a lot of people, that's true. For some, like Rue, it's not. And I think we get way too hung up on diagnoses. And I try to set patients' and families' expectations that, again, diagnoses are just words. What I really see in front of me is a person who is in grave distress, and I want to do my best to help them.
So given sort of what you saw, Josh, the over-diagnosing, or not the over-diagnosing, just all the diagnoses that she went through, her substance abuse disorder, we see Rue navigating high school the best she can. Does someone like Rue ever live a normal life, or are they just going to be constantly battling this to the point where, they're not going to be productive in society?
Yeah, I'm going to challenge your use of the word normal, but not to be provocative, but to say that I think the real question you're asking is a person like this ever going to live a life not having to constantly manage having a substance use disorder? And the answer is no.
Okay. It was more than substance abuse. It's all of those mental health issues as well, combining.
Yeah. The answer is no. For, Rue has been dealing with this now for many years. In her formative years, the drug use has changed the way she thinks and has changed the way her brain functions, and she will always be managing having this. Even if she goes years without using, she will still be managing it on a daily basis because the drugs do change the way your brain works.
Let's talk about that. So, Josh, I thought that one of the best episodes of television that I've ever seen was season 2, episode 5 of Euphoria, and it's where all of Rue's lies sort of crash down around her. She's become massively addicted again. She found a way to get drugs by pretending that she was going to be a drug dealer, and then just had, a kid with all the Halloween candy, and all of her lies crashed down around her. When she goes to rehab the first time, it's because of an overdose. She doesn't have an overdose this time, but it's almost worse because she has really put herself in a position that she cannot get out of, and she torches the world around her. Talk to me a little bit about what Rue is going through in that episode.
Yeah. The most important concept to understand why Rue completely falls apart in season 2, episode 5, is the concept of salience.
Okay.
And salience is the engine that drives the cycle of addiction. In neuroscience, salience refers to the process by which a stimulus, like a drug, grabs your attention and is marked by the brain as important. So salience equals importance.
Can you say that in a way that applies to someone who's not going through a drug addiction?
Absolutely.
Like, what is salience to you and me?
Yeah, absolutely. To understand salience, we must first separate two different neurologic experiences: impact, or liking something, and salience, or wanting something.
Okay, so there's impact and salience, liking and wanting.
Yeah. Okay. And salience is wanting. And for somebody with a drug addiction, the wanting feels like needing. What salience looks like to a normal person is something that you need to live.
Okay.
Like you need air to breathe.
Okay.
That is what salience feels like to a drug-addicted person, that they need that drug to exist. What is super important to both of us are our families. We would die for our families.
If one of our family members was in danger, we would abandon all other wants and needs to take care of our family member, to satisfy that.
Yeah.
And you're saying that essentially, like, drug addiction is the family member's in danger and they're going to do whatever they can. It's the same feeling.
It replaces that feeling.
Wow. So it's as powerful as I'm going to save my daughter for me is what they're feeling when they need drugs.
Yeah. So take it back to Rue's journey. Early, she likes the drugs.
Right.
However, by season 2, her brain's dopamine system has just been hijacked. It's no longer signaling pleasure. It's signaling salience, that importance, that needing. Her brain has assigned an infinite importance value to the drug, making the wanting so loud that it drowns out every other biologic and moral survival instinct. You and I think that we have assigned an infinite importance value to the safety of our families.
Right.
But we're also not addicted to opiates. Her dopamine system has become hypersensitized to the drug and any cues associated with it. This creates a salience landscape where the drug becomes the only thing that glows with meaning. In this episode, we see Rue's world narrowed to a pinprick. Every person she loves, her mother, Gia, Jules, is no longer a person to her. They're obstacles standing between her and the drug. Her brain's salience filter has categorized her family, which was heretofore the most important thing, but has categorized her family as irrelevant or threats, while the drug is the only vital target. The jewelry she steals isn't jewelry. In her mind, it is instantly translated into the chemical value of the drug. They trigger a massive spike in dopamine that says this leads to the reward. What Euphoria captures so well in this episode is that Rue isn't choosing to be cruel to her family. Her prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain responsible for logic and morals, has been bypassed by this dopamine system. The drug has become a super salient stimulus, the most important thing.
Right.
To Rue's brain in that moment, getting the drug feels as necessary as a drowning person feels the need to get to the surface for air.
Yeah, and salience is obviously the thing where I think that us normies, and I know you hate the term, but we use it with some big old quotey fingers. It's hard for us to understand why people don't choose to just not do the drugs. And
That's right.
It's more, tell me if I'm wrong about this, it's more powerful than even people who are like alcoholic, because drugs change your brain in a way that alcohol doesn't. Alcohol does change your brain, but not to the level that drugs will reprogram your brain. And so it's incredibly hard to just not do it. In fact, it's impossible because your brain has been rewired that this is the only thing I need. And I mention that to say, I think it's important that families don't take it personally when you might be dealing with a family member who has had their pathways rewritten like this.
Jeff, you make two very important points there. One is that opioid addiction specifically is different than alcohol use disorder. And one of the reasons we know that is by simply the statistics around people who are successful with abstinence-only treatment for alcohol, which is pretty high, and abstinence-only treatment for folks with opioid use disorder, which is abysmally low, around 5%.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, that is the thing that we know rewrites the brain. In fact, I can't put it better than the drug dealer Lori puts it in episode 5, where she talks about how nothing gives you pleasure anymore except the drug.
Right.
And it actually makes holes in your brain. It doesn't make actual physical holes, but when you look on functional magnetic resonance imaging, functional MRIs, to find out where the brain's lighting up and being active, there are big holes in the pleasure centers unless somebody's being stimulated with the drug. Oof. The second great point you made was about how families shouldn't take this personally. They shouldn't take it personally. That's impossible to do when someone is saying the most hurtful things ever through the haze of trying to avoid withdrawal and trying to get drugs.
And when it's your kid.
It's your kid. Yeah. But what they really need to do is at some point come to grips with the most compassionate thing you can do is not follow someone down their addiction hole.
What does that look like? What does that mean? Because obviously you're not talking about doing drugs with them.
I'm not talking about doing drugs with them, but what I'm talking about is setting firm boundaries where I'm sorry you can't come around here anymore. I'm sorry you can't have access to our money. I'm sorry we can't do this for you anymore. They're going to say they hate you for it. But what I counsel families about is that if you get dragged down with them into this hole and you are destroyed too, you are not going to be ready or be there for them when they want to get come out of rock bottom.
Wow, that's
what
said.
You need to do. And what I find I do a lot is give people permission to say no to their loved ones and tell them that it is okay to set a boundary is not abandoning them. People need to hear those words when they're dealing with somebody who is in, with a substance use disorder and is at rock bottom. They need to be okay. They need to be validated that it's okay to say no.
I mean, and of course they do. Of course they do. I wouldn't have thought of that, but like as soon as you say it, it's so obvious where it's like, if you're a parent and you're dealing with your kid, somebody else, it would be really powerful for someone else to say, it is okay to set boundaries with your kid, because there's got to be so much guilt you feel as a parent. Like, where did I go wrong? Blah, blah, blah with my kid. And I need to do whatever I can to save them. And it's like, no, actually the best way to save them is to take a step back and be ready for when they're ready to be saved. Yeah, I imagine that's incredibly powerful for parents to hear. And I bet you have to say it 5, 6, 7, 50 times before some of them hear it.
Sometimes. Yeah,
that's wild. That's wild.
A character who actually does this very well in Euphoria, and one we haven't talked about and one we should, as the Ali character, played as he plays every character masterfully by Coleman Domingo.
Yeah, Coleman's amazing.
He's one of my favorite actors right now, and he does this. He just shuts Rue off when she attacks him earlier in season 2. In season 2, just shuts her off. I can't have you in my life. And then when she's hit rock bottom,
she's ready. Yeah,
he said, from lessons from his own addiction, he says, "I forgive you. Let's move forward."
That's incredibly powerful. Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people who have gone through the program and very similar lessons, and God, I just don't wish drug addiction on anybody, man. It seems awful.
The really good news is that it is also treatable. And our science and our understanding of how these substances work on people's brain has come leaps and bounds just in the 25 years that I've been in psychiatric practice.
Yeah.
And we have new, ever-evolving treatments. People with opioid use disorders, I firmly believe, and I think the science backs this up, that you can have a successfully managed condition with medication-assisted treatment with such substances such as buprenorphine, methadone, naltrexone, and others, along with counseling and ever vigilant therapy and mindfulness about managing your condition.
But yet it's still only at 5%.
No. That 5% is with abstinence-only treatment.
Okay, gotcha.
If you just say, like NA, just say, I'm just not going to do it. That can work for a lot of people with alcohol. For opiates, it's just a different beast. And the remission rates are as high, around 60%, for people in abstinence-only treatments for alcohol after 5 years. It can be that high for people with opioid use disorder with medication-assisted treatment.
Okay. That's great. I mean, and that's so good to know, and to just have that in the back of your head that like there is hope, like especially if you're the person who's trying to help a person who wants to get help, through it, that there actually is some hope there. Yeah, Josh, I think we said it earlier that like Euphoria has just so much that we, could talk about. They do such a good job with everybody's backstory to make them, very empathetic. Fezco's background with the mom being a drug dealer and then him essentially falling into the family business and seeing it as a way to take care of his younger brother. I don't think you've seen the episode, but his little brother gets shot and killed in a police raid later on. And, it would have been great to see what they did with the Fezco character. Angus Cloud, unfortunately, passed. I don't know the exact details of it. I know that it was, I don't want to use the word suicide. His dad apparently, I think, died, and then he was really, really torn up about it. But, we lost a incredible shining star way too early. I was really excited to see what else he was going to do.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, Josh, I don't know if there's anything else we need to talk about. We're running low on time. That's our coverage of Euphoria. We do have a top 5 this week, and we're going to have a little we're going to have a little fun now. We did not talk at any point about the death of Chuck Norris.
Oh.
You and I were big fans of the Chuck Norris jokes. I don't know that we were necessarily fans of Chuck Norris, but if someone said, hey, who's the toughest man alive? I probably would have said Chuck Norris because the jokes are so good. But now that he's dead, it leaves an opening for who is the toughest guy in Hollywood. And not the most physically imposing guy, but who's legitimately dangerous. You met him on the street and they could just kick your butt. So I put together the top 5 list of the guys that I think are the toughest guys in Hollywood.
Okay, I'm really excited for this. Quite the turn from our coverage of Euphoria.
From Euphoria.
I'm for it. So
nothing about this was inspired by Euphoria. This is strictly my love for Chuck Norris.
Do you have any honorable mentions?
I do have honorable mentions, and even before that, Josh, I want to give a quick caveat because I know that there's a lot of people that can be argued for. So one of my caveats is you can't have been a fighter first. Okay, so if you were a fighter turned actor, then I didn't include you in this list. Randy Couture was the heavyweight champion of MMA, became an actor. He could obviously make the list, but if you were a fighter first, then I kept you off the list. And then the other part is I wanted to really focus on people who were like superstars. So there's certain people that I didn't include. Okay, so I didn't include people like Scott Adkins. You'll see him a lot, but you don't necessarily know him by name. He's probably one of the toughest guys, but not a megastar. So yeah, let me get to my honorable mentions. A couple of international stars that, again, I just don't think are big enough stars here. Donnie Yen and Tony Jaa. These guys are elite level stunt performers, trained in Muay Thai. Donnie's trained in Tai Chi, Wing Chun, kickboxing. These guys are super tough. I just don't think that they're like big enough stars here. Someone like Michael Jai White, inarguably one of the toughest guys. Again, just not a big enough of a superstar. My true honorable mention here, Josh, is Bob Odenkirk.
Bob, you mean Saul?
Yes, and he's in my honorable mentions. Please don't just dismiss this list whole cloth. He's in this list because I just think it's cool that he trained for 2 years for the movie Nobody. Somebody was like, let's make him an action star. And so he trained for a couple years in boxing and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and weapons for Nobody. And then when Nobody 2, when they wanted to make Nobody 2, they went to his trainer and was like, hey, how fast can we get Bob in shape? And his trainer said, he's in shape. He didn't stop training. He loved the training so much that he stuck with it. And so I just think that's really impressive that a man in his like 50s, 60s is like, I just think training is awesome. And so continued training in these disciplines. So Bob Odenkirk, you're my honorable mention, not the top 5 for the toughest guys in Hollywood.
That's great. He's always been one of my favorite actors, even back when he was doing really weird stuff back in the day. So,
oh yeah.
Okay, Jeff, who's your number 5? Newest, toughest guy in Hollywood.
So number 5, we're going to go with Keanu Reeves.
Okay.
He just is so well trained in actual, he is so well trained in actual martial arts disciplines and not just stunt choreography. He's trained in judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. He has high level tactical firearms training. He's trained so consistently for so many years that if you met Keanu Reeves on the street, even though he seems like a nice guy, he will absolutely tear you apart. So Keanu Reeves is my number 5.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay, number 4.
Number 4, we're going to go with Frank Grillo. I don't even know if Frank's a household name, but you and I love him so much. And I've met him a few times in real life. He's just an awesome guy. He's a lifelong boxer. He regularly spars and fights, well into his 50s. He's trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You're going to notice a theme here that a lot of these guys are tumblers. He's the closest thing to a true fighter's sort of lifestyle on this list. And I would not want to mess with Frank Grillo.
Absolutely. Okay, number 3.
Number 3 is not an actor, but he's so well known that he makes the list, and it's Guy Ritchie.
Really?
So Guy Ritchie is a director, and he is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And there are very few black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it's under Renzo Gracie. So he is a legitimate tough guy. Decades of consistent grappling training. He's just so technically dangerous that even if you're 300 pounds, he's going to put you in a leg lock and break your leg, and it's game over. So Guy Ritchie, you're my number 3, a legitimate tough guy.
Okay, all right, you're number 2.
So even though Guy could probably kick this guy's ass, Tom Hardy.
Oh.
Tom Hardy actively competes in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments. He's won multiple gold medals in regional competitions. He's only a blue belt, which is a far cry from a black belt, but he's also got a lot of pounds on Guy, and you got to sort of factor that into account. There's a great story about a guy who entered a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition, and he makes it to the finals, and he's like, hey, that kind of looks like Tom Hardy. And he's like, holy shit, that is Tom Hardy. Holy shit, I'm fighting Tom Hardy. And I think Tom Hardy eventually beat him and just like walked away. And Tom was just there to be a competitor. He wasn't there to be a superstar. He was just there. So Tom Hardy's my number 2.
You actually did get a little sense that Tom Hardy was pulling some punches when he played as Bane.
Oh, Josh, you and I have to cover Warrior. We have to cover Warrior. 1, it's got Frank Grillo. 2, we see Tom Hardy and Joel Edgerton just MMA each other to death. It's a really good movie. We should cover that at some point.
All right. You 7 Warrior fans out there, just wait for our coverage of that. But for now, Jeff, who's your number 1?
So number 1 almost breaks my rules because he does come from WWE, but I don't consider World Wrestling an actual fighting discipline. So it is Dave Bautista.
Oh.
Dave actually fought in the UFC, and he won. So this was back in 2013. He's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is pretty high. He continually trains. He's obviously very strong. He's very large. I think you put all these guys in a room, and Dave Bautista walks out. So he's got the size. He's got the real training. He is a legit threat. Dave Bautista is, in my mind, the new Chuck Norris.
Okay, so we have to come up with a bunch of Dave Bautista jokes.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
All right. great list, Jeff, of the newest, toughest guys in Hollywood. Now that Chuck Norris is one person that I think is missing from your list. What about Reacher, Alan Rickson?
Look, Alan's one of those guys where he looks great, and he's really great at stunt fighting, but he's not trained. And so if you put him in the ring with Dave Bautista, if you even put him in the ring with Keanu Reeves, I bet those guys get him to tap pretty quickly. And so being large and being muscular does not mean that you're a tough guy, does not mean that you know how to fight. And this isn't a great example, but Matt Damon is famous for being Jason Bourne. Matt Damon is not a tough guy, and he talks all the time about how enamored he is with Tom Cruise doing his own stunts and whatnot. And Matt Damon's always like, I'm happy when my stunt guy goes in there and I don't have to do it. So just because you see somebody on screen be a tough guy doesn't mean that you're a tough guy. Jake Gyllenhaal is another, notable exception. He's trained really hard in both boxing and MMA. You could probably put him high on this list. That's a notable exception. But, and look, I'm not a tough guy. I did some research into this, but if there are people that you think I missed, absolutely, put them in the comments. Would love to know who we should make the next Chuck Norris, because I think Dave Bautista right now is the answer.
So you're saying, Jeff, is in a fight, just because you're large doesn't mean you'd be in charge.
That's right. Because I've never won a fight with my wife, and she is 5'1" and 100 pounds. So again, Josh, that's the list, the Cinemental list that nobody asked for of the top 5 toughest guys in Hollywood now that Chuck Norris is dead. And I don't think anybody takes the crown. I think that the throne will be vacant for a long time because Chuck Norris had that much of an impact. All right, Josh, I hope today's episode was, very helpful from a mental health standpoint. Obviously, we always try and make these as helpful as we can. Sometimes we're just having fun. Euphoria is a show that I think had a large impact in terms of mental health and did a really good job of providing some references for how kids are actually feeling, despite it being so stylized. So kudos to the filmmakers. Any last thoughts on mental health before we wrap it up?
One final thing, we didn't get to mention this, but Eric Danes did pass away. And he passed away from a disease called ALS, or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or Lou Gehrig's disease. And I just want to mention that this is a really tragic illness where your nerve cells in the rest of your body outside your brain start to die, and you lose function while you're aware of the whole thing.
Oh,
and
God.
I think Mr. Danes did some pretty fabulous things as he was dying to draw attention to the disease. He's got a Netflix special that was put out after his death about the dying process. I haven't seen it yet. I've heard it's very powerful, and he was just a really powerful actor during my time. My adulthood. He was on Grey's Anatomy. He was on The Last Ship. He was on Euphoria. He was open about some of his own struggles with addiction, and I will miss him as an actor.
Yeah, me too. Fun fact about him too, Josh. His Make-A-Wish actually was John Cena. So John Cena was there with him at the end.
He just went like this. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think it's hard to understand truly just how awful neurological diseases are. I had a child who had botulism and watched her just not be able to move, and it was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced in my life. And to be aware of what's going on, it's just got to be awful. And anytime our bodies fail us, it's got to be really tough. And from everything I've read, like you said, he went through it with grace, and tried to be helpful. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you as always for watching or listening to Cinemental and our coverage of Euphoria. Cinemental is produced by me, Jeff Jones, and edited by David Haverty. If you like this episode, please subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also watch clips of Cinemental on YouTube, where we would love to hear what you would like us to cover next. You can also watch my companion series, The One Thing, where I take a deeper dive into screenwriting, both available on the Large and in Charge channel on YouTube. You can find Dr. Jones on LinkedIn, or by following him from a safe distance 3 cars behind. This has been a Large and in Charge production in association with PMC Media. For Dr. Josh Jones, I am Jeff Jones, and we will see you next week.
I want you to hit me as hard as you can.